A massive Tyrannosaurus rex steps into a bustling city street, cars screeching to a halt as commuters grab their phones to record the spectacle. But this isn't a movie scene or a nightmare. This is Tuesday morning in a world where humans and dinosaurs share the same planet. What if I told you that somewhere in an alternate reality, your biggest worry isn't traffic jams or Monday meetings, but whether that velociraptor eyeing your lunch is actually hungry? What if the extinction event 66 million years ago never happened, and evolution took a completely different path? Welcome back to Mindshift. Don't forget to subscribe and drop your favorite what if topic in the comments. We love hearing your wild ideas. The Chicxulub asteroid never came. That massive space rock, roughly 6 miles wide, that was supposed to slam into Earth 66 million years ago and end the age of dinosaurs, it simply missed. Maybe it got pulled into Jupiter's gravitational field, or perhaps it shattered against another celestial body. The result? Dinosaurs kept evolving. Without the sudden climate catastrophe that wiped out 3/4 of Earth's species, the Cretaceous period extended far beyond what we know from our timeline. The planet remained warm and humid, with no ice caps and sea levels hundreds of feet higher than today. Lush forests stretched from pole to pole, and inland seas carved up the continents into island chains. In this world, the fearsome Tyrannosaurus rex didn't represent the end of an era. It was just getting started. Over millions of years, T-Rex lineages branched into dozens of specialized hunters. Some grew even larger, becoming 50-foot apex predators that could take down the massive sauropods that continued to thrive. Others evolved smaller, more agile forms, pack hunters with enhanced intelligence and coordination that made wolves look like amateurs. But here's where things get really interesting. Dinosaurs didn't just get bigger and meaner. They got smarter. The troodontids, already showing promising signs of intelligence in our timeline, had 60 million extra years to develop their cognitive abilities. Their descendants developed complex social structures, used primitive tools, and some species even began manipulating their environment in ways that bordered on agriculture. The herbivorous dinosaurs weren't idle either. Hadrosaurs evolved sophisticated communication systems, using their elaborate crests to produce complex musical languages that could carry messages across vast distances. Some developed symbiotic relationships with smaller species, creating the first interspecies alliances in Earth's history. The massive sauropods became living ecosystems, with smaller dinosaurs, early mammals, and various other creatures making permanent homes in their thick hide and along their lengthy necks. This was a world where evolution had time to experiment, to create creatures that make our fossil record look like a rough draft. By 30 million years ago, something unprecedented was happening in certain corners of this dinosaur-dominated Earth. The descendants of those intelligent troodontids were building, not just nests or simple shelters, but organized communities with clear architectural planning. These evolved dinosaurs, let's call them the cerebrosaurs, stood about 8 feet tall with large forward-facing eyes and incredibly dexterous clawed hands. Their brains had tripled in size compared to their ancestors, and they developed something no dinosaur species before them ever had: true collaborative problem-solving abilities. Their first settlements appeared in what we'd recognize as modern-day Mongolia and Western North America. These weren't random collections of dens, but carefully planned communities with designated areas for different activities. They dug sophisticated burrow systems that served as both homes and defensive structures, complete with multiple entrances, ventilation shafts, and communal gathering spaces. The cerebrosaurs developed a form of primitive metallurgy, not by smelting ores like humans would eventually do, but by learning to shape and sharpen the abundant metallic meteorite fragments that littered their world. They created tools that allowed them to hunt more effectively and modify their environment more dramatically. But perhaps their most remarkable achievement was domestication. These dinosaur engineers learned to tame and breed smaller species for specific purposes. Fast, agile Compsognathus became their messengers and scouts. Heavily armored Ankylosaurus variants were bred into living bulldozers for construction projects. Some cerebrosaur communities even managed to form working relationships with certain pterosaur species, using them for aerial reconnaissance and communication between distant settlements. Their society developed a complex hierarchy based not on size or strength, but on problem-solving ability and innovation. The greatest inventors and architects held the highest positions, leading teams of specialized workers in increasingly ambitious projects. As these dinosaur civilizations matured, they began to spread across continents, following migration routes and establishing trade networks. They were developing art, creating the first known examples of decorative cave paintings by any non-human species, depicting not just their hunts and daily life, but abstract concepts that suggested they were beginning to grapple with questions about their place in the world. While the cerebrosaurs were building their first civilizations, the rest of the dinosaur world wasn't standing still. The extended evolutionary timeline allowed for an explosion of diversity that would make our modern ecosystems look simple by comparison. In the vast inland seas, marine reptiles had grown to truly monstrous proportions. Mosasaurs the size of blue whales patrolled the depths, while evolved plesiosaurs developed pack-hunting behaviors that turned ocean travel into a deadly gamble. Some marine species developed echolocation systems that rivaled anything dolphins would later achieve, creating underwater communication networks that spanned entire ocean basins. The skies belonged to pterosaurs that had grown beyond anything in our fossil record. Some species achieved wingspans of over 100 feet, capable of staying airborne for months at a time and traveling between continents without ever touching land. These aerial giants developed their own complex societies, with established flight paths, territorial boundaries, and seasonal gathering places that functioned like massive flying cities. But the most dramatic changes were happening on land. The familiar dinosaur body plans had branched into forms that would seem alien to us. Some theropod lineages developed multiple arms, becoming six-limbed predators with unprecedented coordination and grasping ability. Certain sauropod species evolved segmented, almost worm-like body plans that allowed them to burrow through soil and emerge to feed on deep root systems. The plant life evolved alongside these creatures, developing increasingly sophisticated defense mechanisms. Some trees grew bark that could deliver electric shocks. Others developed symbiotic relationships with aggressive insect colonies, essentially hiring their own security forces. Certain grasslands evolved to be mobile, with root systems that could relocate entire meadows away from overgrazing. This was the world that early mammals inherited when they finally began their own evolutionary journey toward intelligence. But they weren't inheriting an empty planet waiting to be claimed. They were entering an ecosystem already dominated by creatures that had spent tens of millions of years perfecting the art of survival, adaptation, and in some cases, civilization itself. The stage was set for one of the most complex evolutionary arms races in Earth's history. 7 million years ago, in the dense forests of what we know as East Africa, something extraordinary happened. A small group of early hominids, barely distinguishable from their ape cousins, encountered something that would change the trajectory of human evolution forever. A pack of evolved raptors hunting in perfect coordination. These weren't the velociraptors from movies. These creatures, standing nearly 6 feet tall with brilliant blue and green plumage, had spent millions of years perfecting their hunting strategies. Their intelligence had evolved to rival that of early primates, and they possessed something humans were just beginning to develop: complex communication through both vocal calls and elaborate body language. The encounter should have ended with the early humans becoming lunch. Instead, something unprecedented occurred. The raptor pack's leader, a scarred female with distinctive silver markings, paused mid-attack. She tilted her head, studying these strange upright apes with their primitive tools, sharpened sticks and simple stone scrapers. What happened next would be debated by the paleontologists and anthropologists of this alternate timeline for centuries. The raptor pack didn't attack. Instead, they observed. For 3 days, they followed this group of early humans, watching them gather food, use tools, and communicate with each other. The humans, terrified but curious, began to notice patterns in the raptors' behavior. They weren't just predators. They were problem solvers. The breakthrough came when both groups encountered a massive Dinosuchus, a 40-foot crocodilian that had wandered far from its usual river territory. Neither species alone could handle such a predator, but together, the humans used their tools to distract and harass the giant crocodile while the raptors used their speed and coordination to attack its blind spots. After driving off the common threat, something extraordinary happened. The lead raptor approached the human leader and performed what can only be described as a bow, lowering her head and extending her clawed hands in a gesture of respect. The human responded by offering a share of the fruit his group had gathered. It was the first interspecies alliance between two intelligent species in Earth's history, and it would reshape both evolutionary lines forever. The partnership between early humans and evolved raptors didn't happen overnight. It took generations of careful cooperation, failed communications, and gradual trust building. But once established, it accelerated the development of both species in ways that pure natural selection never could have achieved. The humans brought tool-making, fire control, and an emerging understanding of agriculture. The raptors contributed superior hunting techniques, enhanced sensory abilities, and their natural understanding of pack dynamics. Together, they created the first mixed-species settlements communities where human families lived alongside raptor packs in carefully negotiated territories. This collaboration forced rapid changes in human evolution. Those humans who could better communicate with their raptor partners through gesture, simple sounds, and eventually more complex language, had significant survival advantages. Human brain development accelerated as the demands of interspecies cooperation selected for enhanced cognitive abilities, pattern recognition, and social intelligence. The raptors evolved too. Living alongside humans exposed them to new ways of thinking about tools and environmental manipulation. Some raptor clans began using human-made spears, adapting them for their own hunting styles. Others learned to use fire, though they never mastered its creation. Most importantly, they began developing more sophisticated vocal communication, influenced by the complex sounds their human partners were making. These mixed communities faced challenges no pure species group ever had to handle. Resource allocation became a complex negotiation between species with different dietary needs and hunting preferences. Territory disputes required diplomatic solutions that neither species had biological programming to handle. Child rearing became a community effort, with young humans and raptor hatchlings growing up together, creating bonds that transcended species barriers. The most successful communities developed what we might recognize as the first interspecies governments council systems, where both human elders and raptor pack leaders made collective decisions. They established trade relationships with other mixed communities, creating networks that spanned thousands of miles. But not all encounters between evolving humans and dinosaurs were peaceful. Other dinosaur species saw these alliances as threats. Massive theropods viewed the growing settlements as challenges to their territorial dominance. Herbivorous dinosaurs, driven by changing climates and expanding human agriculture, increasingly came into conflict with these new communities. The stage was being set for a much larger evolutionary arms race, one that would determine whether cooperation or competition would define the relationship between humans and dinosaurs. As human-raptor alliances spread across continents, they encountered the full diversity of the dinosaur world, and each meeting demanded new adaptations. In the northern forests, they faced massive tyrannosaur descendants that hunted in family groups. In the southern grasslands, herds of evolved triceratops had developed sophisticated social structures that rivaled early human tribes. The humans who thrived in this world were nothing like the humans who would eventually evolve in our timeline. Constant exposure to large predators selected for individuals who were faster, stronger, and more alert. But more importantly, it selected for those who were better at reading the behavioral cues of other species. These humans developed an almost supernatural ability to predict animal behavior, to sense aggression or curiosity in creatures that towered over them. Their technology evolved along completely different paths. Instead of focusing primarily on hunting weapons, they developed tools for communication, negotiation, and coexistence. They created elaborate sound-making devices that could mimic the calls of various dinosaur species. They developed camouflage techniques using dinosaur sense and behavioral mimicry. Some communities even learned to ride certain smaller dinosaur species, forming the world's first cavalry units. The raptor partners evolved too, becoming larger and more intelligent with each generation. The constant mental stimulation of working with humans accelerated their cognitive development, They began using more sophisticated tools, developing their own crude art forms, and some even started showing evidence of abstract thinking, contemplating concepts beyond immediate survival needs. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. These mixed communities developed mythologies that treated humans and dinosaurs as equals in the natural order. They created art depicting cooperation between species, established rituals that celebrated their partnerships, and developed ethical systems based on mutual respect rather than human dominance. By 5 million years ago, these communities had spread to every habitable continent. They'd learned to coexist with or avoid the most dangerous dinosaur species, established trade routes that connected distant settlements, and developed sustainable agricultural systems that worked within existing ecosystems rather than replacing them. Humanity was evolving, but not toward dominance over nature, toward partnership with it. The question was whether this cooperation could survive the challenges that lay ahead. When you're sharing a planet with 50-foot predators, traditional city planning goes out the window. The first major human settlements in this dinosaur world looked nothing like the ancient cities we know from our timeline. Instead of spreading outward across the landscape, they grew downward and upward, creating multi-level communities that could be sealed off at a moment's notice. The city of New Haven, established around 3 million years ago in what we'd recognize as the Mediterranean basin, became the template for human urban development. Built into the side of a massive cliff face, it extended nearly 200 feet down into the rock and rose 300 feet up the cliff wall. Every entrance could be sealed with massive stone barriers operated by counterweight systems, engineering marvels that required the combined strength of humans and their raptor partners to operate. The underground levels served multiple purposes. The deepest chambers housed food storage and water reservoirs, protected from both dinosaur raids and natural disasters. Middle levels contained workshops, meeting halls, and the community's most precious resource, the egg incubation chambers where both human children and raptor hatchlings were raised together in temperature-controlled environments. But the most innovative feature was the tunnel network. These cities were connected to other settlements through underground passages that could stretch for hundreds of miles. Teams of human engineers and raptor scouts worked together to dig these tunnels, with raptors using their natural digging instincts, while humans provided the structural engineering knowledge to prevent collapses. The surface-level entrances were designed as elaborate trap systems. What appeared to be simple doorways were actually complex mechanisms that could drop massive stones, release clouds of irritating smoke, or flood with water to deter unwanted dinosaur visitors. Some cities even incorporated captured smaller dinosaurs as living alarm systems. Parasaurolophus with their distinctive calls were particularly popular for this purpose. Above ground, the cities featured narrow walkways and platforms connected by bridges that could be quickly destroyed if larger dinosaurs approached. These elevated pathways allowed humans and their raptor partners to move around their communities without ever touching the dangerous ground level. The architecture wasn't just defensive, it was collaborative, designed to accommodate the different physical needs and abilities of both species living within the same structures. As these underground cities matured, their inhabitants faced a critical problem. How do you travel between distant settlements when the surface world belongs to massive predators? The solution they developed revolutionized transportation in ways that would not be matched until the invention of modern aviation. The sky roads were perhaps the most ambitious engineering project of the ancient world. These elevated transportation networks consisted of massive stone and metal cables, stretched between mountain peaks, supported by towers that rose hundreds of feet above the forest canopy. Along these cables, enclosed gondolas powered by counterweight systems could carry passengers and cargo at speeds that made ground travel seem impossibly slow. Building the sky roads required unprecedented cooperation between species. Pterosaur allies, some with wingspans exceeding 30 feet, carried the initial cable lines between distant points. Human engineers designed the pulley systems and structural supports. Raptor teams provided ground security during construction, fighting off curious or territorial dinosaurs who saw the construction activity as either a threat or an opportunity for easy meals. The gondola cars themselves were marvels of practical design. Each could hold up to 8 humans or 4 raptors, with specialized versions designed for cargo transport. They featured multiple escape hatches, emergency brake systems, and even primitive parachutes made from pterosaur wing membrane for worst-case scenarios. Some routes stretched for hundreds of miles, connecting cities across entire continents. The longest documented sky road ran from the northern ice sheets to the equatorial jungles, a journey that took 3 days by gondola, compared to 3 months of dangerous overland travel. But the sky roads weren't just transportation, they became the backbone of a new economy. Aerial trading posts were established at major intersection points, creating floating markets where goods from across the known world could be exchanged. These stations also served as way stops for long journeys, featuring sleeping quarters, food storage, and repair facilities. The most impressive sky road stations were built around naturally occurring formations, massive trees, mountain peaks, or even the backs of colossal sauropods that had formed symbiotic relationships with certain human communities. These living platforms could actually move along established routes, creating mobile cities that followed seasonal migration patterns. The engineering principles developed for the sky roads would later influence everything from bridge construction to early experiments with flight, as human communities began to dream of true aerial independence. The most revolutionary development in this alternate world's architecture wasn't built from stone or metal, it was grown. By 2 million years ago, human communities had discovered how to create truly living buildings using domesticated plant species that had co-evolved with dinosaurs. These biostructures started with massive tree species that had naturally hollow trunks, originally evolved as nesting sites for smaller dinosaurs. Human botanist engineers learned to guide their growth, creating trees with internal chambers, connected passages, and even primitive plumbing systems using specialized vine networks that could transport water and nutrients throughout the structure. The walls of these living buildings were composed of interwoven branches and specially bred defensive plants. Some varieties could release clouds of irritating spores when threatened, while others grew thorn barriers that could extend or retract on command. The most sophisticated biostructures even incorporated bioluminescent plants that provided light during dark hours, creating buildings that literally glowed from within. Temperature control in these living buildings was managed through symbiotic relationships with small dinosaur species. Certain feathered dinosaurs, about the size of chickens, were bred specifically for their ability to regulate temperature through their breathing patterns. They lived within the walls of the biostructures, their respiration creating airflow that could warm buildings during cold periods and cool them when temperatures rose. These living cities grew rather than being built, with new sections added as the community's population expanded. Planning a biostructure required thinking decades ahead, as major architectural changes needed to be guided through multiple growing seasons. Master bioarchitects became some of the most respected members of society, their knowledge of plant behavior and growth patterns determining the success or failure of entire communities. The most impressive examples were the canopy cities, entire communities built into the tops of massive trees that stretched 400 feet above the forest floor. These aerial villages were completely invisible from ground level, protected from large predators by sheer height and camouflaged by the natural forest canopy. Some of these living cities even developed mobility, with root systems that could slowly relocate the entire structure over periods of years, allowing communities to follow changing environmental conditions or avoid areas where dangerous dinosaur populations were increasing. In our world, humans eventually claimed the top of the food chain through technology and cooperation. But in a world where dinosaurs continued evolving for 66 million years, that position was already occupied, and the occupants weren't giving it up easily. The apex predators of this alternate Earth were creatures that made our timeline's T-Rex look like a house cat. The Titanosaurus rex, a descendant of the classic Tyrannosaurus, had grown to lengths exceeding 60 feet and possessed intelligence levels comparable to modern great apes. These massive hunters didn't just rely on brute force. They used strategy, tools, and even primitive forms of agriculture, managing herds of smaller dinosaurs like livestock. But the food chain wasn't simply linear. It had evolved into a complex web where intelligence, not just size, determined survival. The raptor descendants that had partnered with humans occupied a unique middle position, too small to challenge the true giants, but too intelligent and well-organized to be easy prey. They'd become the world's ultimate middle management, coordinating between the massive apex predators above them and the smaller creatures below. Humans found themselves in an entirely new category: intelligent scavengers with aspirations of farming. They couldn't compete physically with any large dinosaur species, but their tool-making abilities and partnership with raptors gave them access to resources that pure strength couldn't provide. They became the world's first ecological brokers, facilitating relationships between different species and managing resources that no single species could control alone. The herbivorous dinosaurs had evolved their own sophisticated responses to millions of years of predation pressure. Massive Triceratops descendants traveled in herds of thousands with complex social hierarchies that included specialized defender castes. Individuals bred specifically for combat, who would sacrifice themselves to protect the herd's young and reproductive members. Some herbivore species had even developed what could only be called agriculture, deliberately planting and tending crops that they would harvest seasonally. These dinosaur farmers created the first interspecies trade relationships, exchanging surplus plant foods with human communities in return for protection services and manufactured tools. The old concept of survival of the fittest had evolved into survival of the most cooperative. Success belonged to those who could form the most beneficial alliances across species boundaries. While our timeline's humans were domesticating wolves and wild grains, the humans of this dinosaur world were attempting something far more ambitious: taming creatures that could easily eat them. The process took thousands of generations and required completely different approaches than traditional animal domestication. The breakthrough came with the Compsognathus, chicken-sized dinosaurs with surprising intelligence and strong flocking instincts. Early human settlements discovered that these small dinosaurs could be trained not just as hunting companions, but as living communication networks. Compiflocs could carry messages between distant settlements, remember complex routes, and even perform simple reconnaissance missions. From there, domestication efforts expanded to larger species. The Parasaurolophus descendants, with their elaborate head crests and sophisticated vocal abilities, became the world's first living communication systems. Different communities bred them for different musical ranges, creating regional dialects that could carry coded messages across vast distances. A trained Parasaurolophus could produce sounds that human ears couldn't detect, allowing for truly private conversations even in mixed species communities. But the most ambitious domestication project involved the smaller sauropod species. Humans discovered that certain long-necked dinosaurs could be trained as living construction equipment. These creatures could lift massive weights, reach incredible heights, and work for days without tiring. Entire cities were built with the help of domesticated sauropods who served as living cranes, bulldozers, and transport vehicles. The raptor partners had their own domestication successes. They learned to train the aggressive microraptor species as aerial scouts and message carriers. These tiny flying dinosaurs could navigate through the dangerous sky roads, carrying communications between raptor clans and providing early warning systems for approaching threats. Perhaps the most remarkable development was the domestication of certain plant species by the dinosaurs themselves. The cerebrosaur communities had learned to cultivate fast-growing trees that produced specialized fruits. Some varieties were designed to feed their domesticated animals, while others contained compounds that could be used as medicines or even mild psychoactive substances for religious ceremonies. Trade networks developed around these domesticated species and their products. Communities specialized in breeding particular varieties of useful dinosaurs, creating the world's first genetic engineering programs, thousands of years before humans in our timeline would discover DNA. The success of these domestication efforts fundamentally changed the relationship between intelligence and survival, proving that cooperation and selective breeding could overcome even the most dramatic physical disadvantages. Traditional farming was impossible when your fields might be trampled by migrating herds of 30-ton herbivores or turned into hunting grounds by pack predators. The agricultural revolution in this dinosaur world required completely reimagining how food production could work alongside existing ecosystems rather than replacing them. The solution was symbiotic agriculture, farming systems that provided benefits to the native dinosaur populations while producing food for human communities. The most successful example was the Great Plains Cooperative, a vast agricultural network that stretched across what we'd know as Central North America. This system worked by providing managed grazing areas for the massive herbivorous dinosaur herds. Humans would plant specific crop varieties in designated zones, then guide the dinosaur herds through these areas in carefully timed rotations. The dinosaurs would eat the mature crops, their digestive systems would process and fertilize the plant matter, and their migration patterns would spread seeds across hundreds of miles. In return for this agricultural management, the human communities received a portion of the harvest before the dinosaurs arrived, plus access to other resources the herds provided: shed feathers for insulation, processed plant matter for construction materials, and protection from predators who avoided areas with large herbivore concentrations. The raptor partners played crucial roles as herders and coordinators, using their natural pack-hunting instincts to guide dinosaur movements without triggering panic responses. They developed sophisticated communication systems with the herd leaders, creating what amounted to interspecies negotiations about grazing schedules and territorial boundaries. Aquatic agriculture developed around the massive marine reptiles that dominated the inland seas. Human communities learned to cultivate floating plant gardens that provided food for marine dinosaurs while producing crops that could be harvested from boats. These floating farms were mobile, following the migration patterns of their giant partners and avoiding areas during breeding seasons when the marine reptiles became territorial. The most innovative agricultural development was vertical farming using domesticated tree species. These living towers could produce multiple crops at different heights, with each level designed to attract different beneficial dinosaur species. Small flying dinosaurs would pollinate the upper levels, while ground-dwelling species would fertilize the root systems, creating self-sustaining agricultural ecosystems that required minimal human intervention once established. Life in a dinosaur-human world began before sunrise. Not by choice, but by necessity. The massive predators were often most active during the transition periods between day and night, making dawn and dusk the most dangerous times to be caught unprepared. In the city of Haven's Rest, built into the canopy of giant redwood descendants, the day started with the Compy Call, a coordinated chorus from hundreds of small dinosaurs that served as the community's living alarm clock. These feathered sentries had been positioned throughout the city's defensive perimeter, and their calls provided detailed information about the night's activities. A sharp, staccato call meant predators nearby. Musical trilling indicated all clear. Complex harmonies warned of weather changes or unusual environmental conditions. Families in this world looked nothing like traditional human families. A typical household might include 2 human adults, their children, a mated pair of raptors with their hatchlings, and several domesticated smaller dinosaurs that served various practical functions. Morning feeding time was a carefully orchestrated event, with different species requiring different diets and feeding schedules. The human children would start their day with lessons in multi-species communication, learning to read the body language and vocal cues of their raptor siblings, practicing the whistling patterns used to direct their Compy messengers, and studying the behavioral patterns of the various dinosaur species they might encounter throughout the day. Adult humans began each morning with the threat assessment gathering, a community meeting where scouts, both human and raptor, would report on predator movements, weather conditions, and the status of trade routes. These gatherings were conducted in a hybrid language that combined human speech, raptor vocal calls, and an elaborate system of gestures that could be understood by multiple species. Breakfast was a communal affair, with foods prepared to meet the dietary needs of all community members. Humans might eat cultivated grains and fruits, while their raptor partners consumed specially prepared meat portions. The small dinosaurs were fed insects bred specifically for their nutritional content. Even the giant trees that housed the community were fed. Their root systems received specially prepared nutrient mixtures that helped maintain the living buildings. The morning ritual ended with the opening ceremony, where the community's protective barriers were carefully opened to allow for the day's activities, while maintaining security protocols. The economy of a human dinosaur society was built on specialization and interspecies cooperation. No single species could master all the skills necessary for survival, so communities developed complex systems of specialized roles that played to each species' natural abilities. Human professions had evolved to complement rather than compete with dinosaur capabilities. The most respected human occupation was dinosaur linguist individuals who spent decades learning to communicate with different species and serve as translators during interspecies negotiations. These linguists were essential for everything from trade agreements with distant communities to resolving territorial disputes between different dinosaur clans. Engineers and architects worked in partnership with raptor construction teams, combining human theoretical knowledge with raptor practical skills and physical abilities. A typical construction project might be designed by a human engineer, managed by a raptor crew chief, and executed by teams that included both species working in carefully coordinated roles. The most dangerous profession was explorer scout, teams of humans and raptors who ventured into uncharted territories to establish new trade routes or investigate reports of useful resources. These expeditions required individuals capable of making split-second decisions in life-threatening situations, negotiating with unknown dinosaur species, and surviving in environments where humans had never lived before. Trade between communities was conducted through the traveling markets, elaborate caravans that moved along the sky roads and underground tunnel networks. These markets were mobile cities in themselves, complete with temporary housing for multiple species, portable workshops for manufacturing goods during transit, and sophisticated security systems to protect against both dinosaur attacks and bandit raids. The most valuable trade goods were information and genetics. Communities specialized in breeding particular varieties of useful dinosaurs, and genetic material, eggs, breeding pairs, or detailed breeding records, commanded premium prices. Technical knowledge was equally valuable. New construction techniques, improved domestication methods, or discoveries about dinosaur behavior could make the difference between a thriving community and one struggling to survive. Innovation happened through interspecies collaboration in ways that would be impossible in our timeline. Raptor pack hunting techniques inspired new military strategies. Dinosaur migration patterns led to discoveries about weather prediction and seasonal planning. The natural engineering abilities of various species provided inspiration for human architectural and mechanical innovations. The most successful inventors were those who could think beyond species boundaries, combining the unique capabilities of different creatures into unified solutions for complex problems. The mythology and spiritual beliefs of human dinosaur societies reflected their unique position in the natural world. Unlike our timeline's human religions, which often emphasized human dominance over nature, these belief systems were built around concepts of cooperation, mutual respect, and shared responsibility for maintaining ecological balance. The Great Partnership was the central religious concept, the belief that consciousness itself was a collaborative effort between different forms of intelligence. Creation myths spoke of the first cooperation, when the earliest intelligent species learned to work together rather than simply competing for resources. These stories weren't about gods creating the world, but about different species creating civilization through mutual understanding. Art in these societies was necessarily collaborative. Human artists might create the overall design for a sculpture, while raptor artists used their superior dexterity to handle fine detail work. The most prestigious art forms were living sculptures, carefully bred and trained dinosaurs whose natural behaviors and physical appearance were guided to create living artistic expressions that changed and evolved over time. Music was the most sophisticated cultural development, combining human vocal abilities with raptor calls, Parasaurolophus horn sounds, and the rhythmic contributions of various smaller dinosaurs. Community festivals featured orchestras that included dozens of species, creating soundscapes that no single species could produce alone. The education system was built around mixed species learning groups. Children and hatchlings of different species were raised together, learning not just practical skills but developing the deep emotional bonds necessary for interspecies cooperation to work. By adulthood, individuals felt as comfortable with their cross-species partners as with members of their own species. Coming-of-age ceremonies involved proving one's ability to successfully interact with multiple dinosaur species, demonstrate useful skills that benefited the entire community, and show the wisdom to make decisions that considered the needs of all species involved. These weren't tests of individual achievement, but of one's ability to contribute to the complex social systems that made survival possible. The most profound cultural development was the concept of extended identity. The belief that true intelligence and consciousness existed not within individual minds, but in the relationships and communications between different forms of awareness, working together toward common goals. So here we are, at the end of our journey through a world where that cosmic rock never fell, where evolution took a completely different path, and where humans learned to thrive not by conquering nature, but by joining it. Think about what we've explored together. A planet where intelligence evolved not once, but multiple times across different species, where the greatest achievements came not from individual brilliance, but from the patient work of building understanding between radically different forms of consciousness, where cities grew from living trees, where transportation networks soared through the sky, and where the food chain became a complex web of cooperation rather than simple predation. This alternate Earth challenges everything we assume about progress, civilization, and what it means to be successful as a species. In our world, we measure human achievement by how completely we've dominated our environment, how many forests we've cleared, how many species we've driven to extinction, how effectively we've reshaped the planet to serve our needs. But in this dinosaur world, success was measured differently. Communities thrived when they found ways to work within existing ecosystems rather than replacing them. The greatest heroes weren't conquerors, but translators, individuals who could build bridges between species that had every biological reason to see each other as enemies. The most fascinating aspect might be how this world's humans evolved not just physically, but culturally and spiritually. They developed technologies we can barely imagine, not because they were more advanced than us, but because they were thinking about completely different problems. When your goal isn't to dominate your environment but to find your place within it, you invent different solutions. Would this have been a better world than ours? That's impossible to say. It would certainly have been a more dangerous one for individual humans, but it might have been more sustainable, more diverse, and ultimately more resilient than the path our timeline chose. Every choice in evolution, in history, in our daily lives, closes off certain possibilities while opening up others. The asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs in our timeline was a catastrophe that paved the way for human dominance. But it also eliminated the possibility of the kind of interspecies civilization we've imagined together. As we face our own environmental challenges, maybe there's something to learn from this alternate world we've created. Maybe the key to our future isn't about becoming better at controlling nature, but about becoming better at cooperating with it. What do you think? Could you handle waking up to raptor roommates and compy alarm clocks? Would you trade our world of smartphones and skyscrapers for a life in the canopy cities, partnered with creatures that could tear you apart, but choose to build something incredible with you instead? These thought experiments aren't just fun mental exercises. They're windows into understanding how different choices, different evolutionary paths, different approaches to problem solving can create entirely different realities. Every time we explore a what-if scenario like this, we're expanding our ability to imagine solutions to the challenges in our actual world. If you enjoyed this journey through an alternate Earth, make sure to subscribe to Mindshift for more mind-bending explorations of the roads not taken. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest deep dives into the infinite possibilities of existence. And here's where you come in. Drop a comment below with your favorite what-if topic. What alternate reality would you like us to explore next? What single change to history, evolution, or physics would create the world you're most curious about? Maybe you want to know what would happen if gravity worked differently, or if humans had evolved from a completely different species, or if consciousness could exist in forms we've never imagined. Your suggestions don't just help us create content, they help all of us think bigger, dream stranger, and remember that the world we live in is just one of infinite possibilities. The universe is vast, time is deep, and there are always more questions worth asking. So tell us, what world would you want to explore next?